Sarah Martinez wiped down the last table at the small diner where she worked the night shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she counted her tips for the evening. $23.47. It wasn't much, but every penny counted when you were raising a 6-year-old daughter on your own. She rolled up her sleeves to wash dishes, revealing the intricate tattoo that covered her right forearm. The design showed a military helicopter surrounded by detailed script that read, "In memory of Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez, forever in our hearts." Below it was a date that marked the day her world changed forever. Sarah had gotten the tattoo 2 years after her husband died in Afghanistan. Michael had been a helicopter mechanic with the Army, and the tattoo was her way of keeping his memory alive. She loved the artwork and what it represented, but it often drew unwanted attention and judgment from strangers. The diner's bell chimed as 3 women in expensive clothes walked in, their heels clicking against the worn linoleum floor. They looked around with obvious disdain before reluctantly taking a booth near the window. Sarah grabbed menus and approached their table with a warm smile. "Good evening, ladies. Can I start you off with some coffee or water tonight?" she asked politely. The blonde woman in the center glanced at Sarah's exposed tattoo and immediately wrinkled her nose. "Oh my goodness, look at that thing on her arm," she whispered loudly to her friends, making no effort to hide her disgust. "I know, right? So unprofessional," the brunette replied, shaking her head. "What kind of establishment hires people who look like that?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she maintained her composure. She had dealt with this kind of judgment before. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu," she said quietly, placing the menus on the table and walking away. As she retreated to behind the counter, she could hear their conversation continue. They made loud comments about how tattoos were trashy and wondered what kind of person would destroy their body like that. Each word felt like a small knife. But Sarah forced herself to focus on her work. The night dragged on as the 3 women continued to make snide remarks whenever Sarah came near their table. They ordered elaborate meals, demanded multiple substitutions, and complained about everything from the temperature of their food to the cleanliness of their silverware. Through it all, Sarah served them with professionalism, despite their obvious attempts to make her uncomfortable. Other customers in the diner began to notice the women's behavior. An elderly couple at a nearby table exchanged disapproving looks as they witnessed the treatment Sarah was receiving. A truck driver at the counter shook his head in disgust but continued eating his pie in silence. As the evening wore on, Sarah couldn't help but think about Michael and how proud he had been of his service. The tattoo wasn't just ink on her skin. It was a tribute to a man who had died serving his country, a man who had been the love of her life and the father of her child. These women knew nothing about her story, yet they felt entitled to judge her based on appearance alone. The diner's atmosphere grew tense as more customers became aware of the situation. Sarah tried to stay focused on her other tables, but the constant whispers and pointed stares from the 3 women made it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her work. The harassment escalated when one of the women deliberately knocked over her water glass as Sarah approached to refill their coffee. Water splashed across the table and dripped onto the floor, creating a puddle that Sarah immediately began cleaning up with a towel. "Oh, how clumsy of me," the woman said with fake sweetness, clearly enjoying Sarah's discomfort. "I guess I was just distracted by that horrible artwork on your arm. It's really quite disturbing to look at while trying to eat." Sarah bit her tongue and continued mopping up the spill. "No problem at all. Accidents happen," she replied, though her hands were shaking slightly from the effort to remain calm. "You know," the brunette chimed in, "most respectable restaurants have dress codes that would prevent this kind of display. Maybe you should consider finding work somewhere that doesn't mind having employees who look like they belong in a motorcycle gang." The blonde laughed cruelly. "Or maybe she could get it removed. I hear laser treatments work wonders these days. Of course, that would require having some self-respect first." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her breakdown. She finished cleaning the table and returned to the kitchen area, where she took several deep breaths to compose herself. The cook, an older man named Pete who had worked at the diner for 15 years, noticed her distress. "You okay, Sarah? Those ladies giving you trouble?" "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice cracked slightly. "Just some difficult customers." Pete had seen Sarah's professional demeanor countless times during her 2 years at the diner. She was one of the hardest workers he knew, often staying late to help with prep work and never complaining about difficult shifts. Seeing her upset made his blood boil. "Want me to talk to them?" he offered, but Sarah shook her head. "It's almost closing time. I can handle it," she said, straightening her shoulders and preparing to return to the dining room. Meanwhile, the three women continued their loud conversation, seemingly oblivious to the other customers who were now openly staring at them with disapproval. Their behavior had become so obnoxious that several people were reconsidering their own meals, uncomfortable with the toxic atmosphere they were creating. Just as Sarah was about to take their dessert order, the diner's bell chimed again. A tall man in his mid-40s entered, wearing a simple black polo shirt and jeans. His bearing was unmistakably military, straight posture, alert eyes, and a confident stride that spoke of years of training and discipline. He took a seat at the counter and picked up a menu. But Sarah noticed his attention was immediately drawn to the commotion at the women's table. The blonde had raised her voice again, making another crude comment about tattoos and the kind of people who got them. The newcomer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he listened to their conversation. His eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her professional demeanor despite the obvious harassment she was enduring. When he noticed her tattoo, his expression changed completely. Sarah approached the counter to take his order, still shaken from her encounter with the difficult customers. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you tonight?" The man looked directly at her tattoo, reading the inscription carefully. His face grew serious as he processed what he was seeing. "Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez," he said quietly, more to himself than to Sarah. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Did you know him?" The man's expression softened with recognition and respect. "I knew of him. He was a good soldier. That was a tragic loss for all of us." He paused, studying her face. "You're his widow." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she nodded. It had been so long since someone had acknowledged Michael's service with such genuine respect. "Yes, sir. He was my husband." The conversation at the women's table grew even louder, with one of them making an particularly vicious comment about people who permanently mark themselves like animals. The military man's expression darkened as he listened to their words, his hands clenching slightly on the counter. Commander James Sullivan had spent 22 years in the Navy SEALs, serving multiple tours in some of the world's most dangerous locations. He had seen combat, lost friends, and carried the weight of command through countless difficult missions. But sitting in this small diner, watching a Gold Star widow being humiliated by three entitled women, stirred an anger in him that was both personal and professional. He had read about Staff Sergeant Martinez's death in the military reports. The helicopter mechanic had been killed when his forward operating base came under heavy enemy fire. Martinez had been working on a damaged aircraft when the attack began, but instead of seeking shelter, he had stayed to complete the repairs that would allow wounded soldiers to be evacuated. His actions had saved 7 lives before shrapnel from an enemy rocket took his own. Sarah returned to the women's table to take their dessert order, her hands still trembling slightly from her earlier conversation with the commander. The blonde woman looked up at her with renewed disdain. "Finally, we've been waiting forever," she said rudely. "And honestly, the service here has been absolutely terrible. I'm definitely writing a review about this place online. We'll have 3 slices of chocolate cake," the brunette added. "And make sure they're fresh. We don't want anything that's been sitting around, unlike some people's questionable life choices." Her friends erupted in laughter at the cruel joke, clearly referring to Sarah's tattoo. The sound was sharp and mean, echoing through the nearly empty diner. Commander Sullivan had heard enough. He stood up from his stool at the counter, his full height and commanding presence immediately noticeable. The military bearing that had been subtle while seated became unmistakable as he moved with purpose toward their table. "Excuse me, ladies?" he said in a calm but authoritative voice that carried easily across the diner. The 3 women looked up, momentarily surprised by the interruption. "Yes?" the blonde asked, her tone still haughty but with a hint of uncertainty as she took in his imposing presence. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation," Commander Sullivan continued, his voice remaining level but with an underlying steel that made the women shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You've been making comments about this young lady's tattoo." The brunette straightened defensively.
Well, yes.
It's quite unprofessional and frankly disgusting. This is a restaurant, not some biker bar. Commander Sullivan's eyes hardened. Do you know what that tattoo represents? Some poor decision-making, obviously. The third woman chimed in with a nervous laugh. Probably some ex-boyfriend or something equally ridiculous. The commander stepped closer to their table, his presence now dominating the space. That tattoo honors Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez, United States Army. He was killed in action while serving his country in Afghanistan. This woman is his widow. The silence that followed was deafening. The three women exchanged uncertain glances. But the blonde quickly recovered her composure. Well, that's very sad. But it still doesn't change the fact that tattoos are inappropriate in a food service environment, she said, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Commander Sullivan's expression grew colder. Staff Sergeant Martinez died while repairing a helicopter under enemy fire. He stayed at his post to make sure wounded soldiers could be evacuated to safety. 7 men came home to their families because of his sacrifice. The weight of his words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Other customers in the diner had stopped eating to listen, and the atmosphere had become charged with tension. His widow honors his memory with that tattoo. Sullivan continued, his voice growing stronger. While you sit here in comfort, enjoying freedoms that men like her husband died to protect, you choose to mock the symbol of his sacrifice. Sarah stood frozen near the kitchen, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. No one had ever stood up for her like this, especially not someone who clearly understood the true meaning behind her tattoo. The blonde woman's face had gone pale, but she wasn't ready to back down completely. Look, we're sorry for her loss, but that doesn't mean we have to approve of tattoos in restaurants. Commander Sullivan leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a quieter but more menacing tone. Ma'am, I've served with men and women who have given everything for this country. I've carried their bodies home to grieving families. And I will not sit quietly while anyone disrespects their memory or the people who honor them. The atmosphere in the diner had become electric with tension. Every customer was now openly watching the confrontation, and several had pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Commander Sullivan's words had cut through the women's arrogance like a knife through butter. The brunette tried to salvage the situation. We didn't know about her husband, she said weakly. Maybe we were a little harsh, but you can't blame us for not knowing the whole story. You didn't need to know the story, Commander Sullivan replied firmly. You chose to judge and humiliate a complete stranger based on her appearance. That says everything about your character and nothing about hers. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time that evening, they weren't tears of shame or frustration. They were tears of gratitude and validation. For 3 years since Michael's death, she had endured countless instances of judgment and discrimination because of her tattoo. People made assumptions about her character, her parenting, and her worth based solely on the artwork that honored her fallen husband. The elderly couple who had been watching the harassment earlier began to clap slowly. The applause was picked up by the truck driver at the counter, then by the young couple in the corner booth. Soon the entire diner was applauding Commander Sullivan's intervention and showing their support for Sarah. The 3 women looked around in shock as the restaurant turned against them. The blonde's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. We're paying customers and we don't deserve to be lectured by some stranger. Commander Sullivan straightened to his full height. You're right about one thing. You are customers and you have the right to eat here, but you don't have the right to harass other people while you do it. He turned to address the entire diner. This woman serves those who serve our country by honoring her husband's memory every single day. While we sleep safely in our beds, families like hers pay the ultimate price for our freedom. The least we can do is show them the respect they deserve. The applause grew louder, and several customers stood up to show their support. An older veteran wearing a Marine Corps hat made his way over to Sarah and shook her hand. Thank you for your husband's service, ma'am, he said with genuine emotion, and thank you for keeping his memory alive. The 3 women realized they had completely lost control of the situation. The blonde threw her napkin on the table in frustration. This is absolutely insane. We're leaving. That's probably best, Commander Sullivan agreed coolly. But before you go, I think you owe this lady an apology. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the 3 women exchanged glances. The brunette looked like she might actually apologize, but the blonde's pride wouldn't allow it. We don't owe anyone anything, she said defiantly, standing up and gathering her purse. Commander Sullivan blocked their path to the door with his presence alone. Ma'am, I've given my life to defending your right to be ignorant and disrespectful, but I've also seen what real sacrifice looks like. Your husband didn't die so you could humiliate his widow in a diner. His words hit like physical blows. The blonde's defiance crumbled as the reality of the situation finally sank in. She looked at Sarah, who was still standing near the kitchen with tears in her eyes, and for the first time seemed to truly see her as a person rather than a target for mockery. She started, then stopped. The weight of everyone's stare was crushing. I'm sorry, she finally whispered, barely audible. Louder, Commander Sullivan said firmly. She deserves to hear it properly. The blonde took a shaky breath. I'm sorry. We were wrong to judge you. I'm sorry about your husband. Sarah nodded graciously despite everything they had put her through. Thank you, she said simply. The three women hurried out of the diner, their expensive heels clicking rapidly across the floor as they fled the scene of their humiliation. The moment the door closed behind them, the entire restaurant erupted in cheers and applause. Commander Sullivan walked over to Sarah, who was wiping tears from her eyes. Are you okay? He asked gently. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. No one has ever stood up for me like that before. You don't need to thank me, he replied. Your husband's sacrifice speaks for itself. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time or energy. As the excitement in the diner began to settle, Commander Sullivan returned to his seat at the counter. Sarah poured him a cup of coffee, her hands no longer shaking as they had been earlier in the evening. This one's on the house, she said with a genuine smile. It's the least I can do. Thank you, he replied, then paused thoughtfully. Would you mind telling me about your husband? I'd like to hear about him from someone who really knew him. Sarah's face lit up in a way it hadn't all evening. She glanced around the diner and saw that most of the other customers had finished their meals and left, giving them some privacy to talk. Michael was the kind of person who always put others first, she began, leaning against the counter. Even as a kid, he was always helping neighbors or volunteering for something. When he decided to join the army, he said he wanted to make sure other people's children could grow up safely. Commander Sullivan listened intently as Sarah shared stories about her husband. She told him about how Michael had proposed in their favorite park, how excited he had been when their daughter Emma was born, and how he had called home every single day while deployed, never missing their daughter's bedtime story even with the time difference. He loved working on helicopters, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she talked. He said every aircraft he repaired was someone's ticket home. He took that responsibility seriously. That dedication shows in his final actions, Commander Sullivan observed. Staying to complete those repairs under fire, that takes a special kind of courage. Sarah nodded, touching her tattoo gently. The other soldiers in his unit told me he saved their lives that day. 7 men came home because Michael refused to leave his post. When I got this tattoo, people told me I was crazy for marking my body permanently. But this isn't just a tattoo. It's a reminder of what real heroism looks like. The conversation was interrupted when the elderly veteran who had thanked Sarah earlier approached their section of the counter. Excuse me, miss, he said respectfully. I wanted you to know that my grandson is serving in Afghanistan right now. Knowing there are mechanics like your husband over there gives me peace of mind. Sarah smiled warmly. What's his name? I'll keep him in my prayers. As the evening wound down, other customers stopped by to express their support and share their own connections to military families. The truck driver mentioned his brother who had served in Iraq. A young couple talked about their friend who was currently deployed. What had started as an evening of harassment had transformed into a community coming together to honor service and sacrifice. Commander Sullivan learned that Sarah worked 3 jobs to support herself and her daughter Emma. In addition to the diner, she cleaned offices early in the morning and did freelance bookkeeping from home. Despite the long hours and constant judgment she faced because of her tattoo, she maintained a positive attitude and worked tirelessly to provide for her family. Emma is 6 now, Sarah explained as she refilled his coffee. She's so smart and funny. Sometimes I see Michael in her expressions and it makes me happy and sad at the same time. Does she know about her father's service? Commander Sullivan asked. I tell her stories about him all the time, Sarah replied. I want her to understand that her daddy was a hero who helped other people. When she's older, I'll tell her more about how he died, but for now I focus on how he lived. As closing time approached, Commander Sullivan made a decision. He pulled out his business card and handed it to Sarah. I run a nonprofit organization that helps military families, he explained. We provide scholarships, job training, and support services. I think you and Emma might benefit from some of our programs. Sarah looked at the card in amazement. Warriors Family Foundation was printed in bold letters with Commander Sullivan's name listed as executive director. You started this organization? She asked. After I retired from active duty, he confirmed. I realized that supporting our veterans and their families was just as important as the military service itself. Too many people like you fall through the cracks while dealing with loss and trying to rebuild their lives. Sarah felt overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. What had begun as one of the worst nights at work had somehow transformed into an opportunity she never could have imagined. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll call me next week, Commander Sullivan replied. We have job training programs that could help you develop new skills, and we offer scholarships for military children. Emma could have her college education fully funded. The weight of his offer struck Sarah like a physical blow. She had been working herself to exhaustion for years, always worried about providing for Emma's future. The idea that her daughter might have opportunities she had only dreamed of was almost too much to process. 1 week later, Sarah found herself sitting in the professional offices of the Warriors Family Foundation, still hardly believing the turn her life had taken. Commander Sullivan had been true to his word, and his organization was everything he had promised and more. The foundation occupied an entire floor of a downtown office building, with modern facilities and a staff of dedicated professionals who worked exclusively with military families. Sarah met with counselors, job placement specialists, and education coordinators who all treated her with genuine respect and understanding. Mrs. Martinez, said Jennifer Chen, the Foundation's Family Services Coordinator, we've reviewed your background and situation. You have several options available through our programs. Sarah listened carefully as Jennifer outlined possibilities she had never imagined. The Foundation offered paid training programs in medical administration, computer programming, and business management. They also provided childcare during training hours and job placement assistance upon completion. The medical administration program is particularly good for single mothers, Jennifer explained. It's only 6 months long, but graduates typically earn twice what you're making now in your 3 current jobs. And the hours are much more predictable. But even more exciting was the news about Emma's education. The Foundation's scholarship program would cover not just college tuition, but also private school if Sarah chose that path, tutoring services, and even extracurricular activities like music lessons or sports teams. Your daughter is exactly the kind of child our program was designed to help, Commander Sullivan said as he joined their meeting. Military children often face unique challenges, and we want to make sure they have every opportunity to succeed. Sarah felt tears welling up again, but these were tears of hope rather than frustration. For the first time in years, she could envision a future where she wasn't constantly struggling to make ends meet. Meanwhile, word about the incident at the diner had spread throughout the local community. A customer who had filmed part of the confrontation had posted it on social media, and the video had gone viral within days. The clip showed Commander Sullivan defending Sarah and explaining the meaning behind her tattoo, followed by the entire diner applauding in support. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Military veterans from across the country reached out to share their own stories and express support for Sarah and her family. Local businesses offered her job opportunities, and several organizations made donations to help with her expenses. The 3 women who had harassed Sarah also faced consequences for their behavior. Their identities were discovered through social media, and their employers were contacted by concerned citizens. The blonde woman, who worked for a public relations firm, was terminated after the company decided her behavior was incompatible with their values. The incident served as a powerful reminder that actions have consequences, even in situations where people think they can act without accountability. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from other military families who had faced similar discrimination. Sarah received hundreds of messages from spouses, children, and parents of service members who shared their own experiences with judgment and prejudice. One message particularly touched her heart. It came from a young woman named Lisa, whose brother had been killed in Iraq. "I have a tattoo with his name too," Lisa wrote. "I've gotten so many dirty looks and comments over the years. Seeing someone stand up for you gives me hope that people might start to understand what these tattoos really mean." Commander Sullivan used the attention from the viral video to raise awareness about his foundation and the challenges facing military families. He appeared on several local news programs to discuss the need for better support systems and the importance of honoring those who serve. "Sarah's story isn't unique," he explained during one television interview. "There are thousands of military widows and families struggling to rebuild their lives after losing someone they love. They deserve our support, not our judgment." The foundation saw a significant increase in donations and volunteer applications following the media coverage. Commander Sullivan was able to expand several programs and help even more families in need. For Sarah, the changes in her life were dramatic and immediate. She enrolled in the medical administration program and discovered she had a natural aptitude for healthcare management. The regular schedule and professional environment were a welcome change from the unpredictable hours and occasional harassment she had faced in service jobs. Emma thrived in the Foundation's after-school program, where she received homework help, participated in enrichment activities, and formed friendships with other military children who understood her family's unique situation. "Mommy, are we rich now?" Emma asked one evening as they walked through their new apartment, which the Foundation had helped them secure in a better neighborhood. Sarah laughed and hugged her daughter. "No, sweetheart, we're not rich, but we're blessed. Very, very blessed." The tattoo on Sarah's arm no longer felt like a burden she had to defend. Instead, it had become a symbol of resilience, honor, and the power of community support. She wore short sleeves proudly now, ready to share Michael's story with anyone who showed genuine interest. 6 months later, Sarah walked across the stage at the Warriors Family Foundation graduation ceremony, diploma in hand and a bright future ahead of her. She had completed the medical administration program at the top of her class and already had 3 job offers from local hospitals and clinics. Commander Sullivan presented her diploma personally, and as they shook hands, he said quietly, "Your husband would be proud of the woman you've become and the mother you are to Emma." Sarah beamed with pride and confidence she hadn't felt in years. The woman who had once been reduced to tears by cruel strangers was now poised to begin a career that would provide stability and purpose for her family. In the audience, Emma cheered loudly for her mother, wearing a small military pin that honored her father's service. The 6-year-old had blossomed in the Foundation's programs, showing particular talent in mathematics and science. Her teachers predicted a bright academic future, made possible by the scholarship opportunities that lay ahead. The job Sarah ultimately chose was with a veterans hospital, where her personal understanding of military families made her an invaluable asset to the patient care team. Her colleagues respected her dedication and professionalism, and several commented on how her military family background helped her connect with patients and their families during difficult times. The viral video of that night at the diner continued to circulate on social media, inspiring countless discussions about respect, service, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Many restaurants and businesses used it as a training tool to help employees understand the diversity of their customers and the stories behind their appearances. Commander Sullivan's foundation grew significantly, eventually expanding to serve military families in 3 states. The increased awareness generated by Sarah's story helped secure major corporate sponsorships and government grants that funded new programs and services. 1 year after their first meeting, Sarah and Emma attended the Foundation's annual gala as honored guests. Sarah was invited to speak about her experience and the impact the organization had made on their lives. Standing at the podium in an elegant dress, her tattoo visible and worn with pride, Sarah addressed an audience of donors, volunteers, and other military families. "A year ago, I was working 3 jobs and struggling to imagine how I could provide my daughter with the opportunity she deserved," Sarah began. "I endured judgment and discrimination because of this tattoo, which honors my husband's sacrifice for our country." She paused, looking out at the audience. But one person saw past appearances to understand what this tattoo really represents. "Commander Sullivan didn't just defend me that night, he offered me hope and a path forward. The audience listened intently as Sarah shared her journey from that difficult night at the diner to her current position as a successful professional with a bright future. My husband died serving our country, but his legacy lives on through the support this community has shown our family, she continued. Emma will grow up knowing that her father was a hero, and she'll have opportunities he would have wanted for her. Sarah concluded her speech by addressing other military families in the audience. To anyone who has faced discrimination or judgment because of your service or your loss, know that you are not alone. Your sacrifices matter, your stories matter, and there are people who will stand with you when others try to tear you down. The standing ovation that followed lasted several minutes, with many audience members wiping away tears. After the event, Sarah was approached by a young Marine's wife who had recently lost her husband in combat. The woman was struggling with grief and facing judgment about her decision to get a memorial tattoo. "Your story gives me courage," the young widow said. "I was afraid people would judge me, but seeing how you turned that night into something positive makes me feel stronger." Sarah hugged the woman and shared Commander Sullivan's contact information. "The foundation helped save my life," she said. "Let them help save yours too." As Sarah and Emma drove home that night, Emma asked, "Mommy, will you tell me more stories about Daddy?" Sarah smiled, looking at her daughter in the rearview mirror. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll tell you about how brave he was, how much he loved us, and how his love for our country helped make the world a better place." The tattoo on Sarah's arm caught the light from passing street lamps as she drove. What had once been a source of pain and discrimination had become a symbol of strength, community, and the enduring power of one person's willingness to stand up for what's right. Commander Sullivan's intervention that night at the diner had changed more than just Sarah's life. It had created ripple effects that touched countless other military families, raised awareness about the challenges they face, and demonstrated that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in the everyday moments where we choose to show compassion or turn away. Sarah's story became a testament to resilience, the importance of honoring service members and their families, and the transformative power of community support. Most importantly, it showed that behind every person is a story worth knowing, and that taking time to understand rather than judge can change lives in ways we never expect.